everybody, and welcome to the session. This is the first session. I'll be sharing with you my PowerPoint presentation, and if it can be enabled, one second. Can you enable it for me, Tanya, so that I can share my presentation?
Yes, Roopinder. Give us a minute. We'll figure this out and tell you. It's been enabled, I believe.
Let me do it then. If you can see it on the screen, then can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me begin. This is a topic that I'm been given to talk about: collaborative governance and public policy. Now, whenever we talk about public policy, it's a very, very complex and a wide terrain, you know. Public policy, we largely refer to the government organizations who sort of provide this architecture of policies, rules, regulations, norms, and these includes both the political policy, social policy, cultural policy, economic policy. So whenever we use the word public policy, we are primarily focusing on the government as a prime and foremost institution to lay out rules and regulations for the society at large. And the gamut of these kind of policies are huge. And whenever we talk about the public policy, we are dealing with much more complex a terrain as compared to private policy, because the impact of a private policy or the scope of the private policy is much less as compared to the public policy, because public policy doesn't even have the ramifications in terms of domestic, implications, but also has international implications. And I'm sure you're well versed with it. When we talk about policy making, it does not just mean the domestic policy. We also include international policy, international trade policy, relationship with international organizations, UN, WTO, you name it. So the whole understanding of public policy has to be grounded in the larger milieu of the country itself. So even though the theory of public policy or of collaborative governance is similar, we actually have to modify it according to the terrain, according to the country, according to the cultural context itself. So this is a larger framework. That means when I'm going to talk to you in about 40 minutes or 50 minutes, you need to keep this in mind that this is a complex topic. And when we add the word collaborative governance, it becomes much more complex, because we are talking not just of the government, we are initiating a process by which we want active participant involvement of various stakeholders, both within the country and outside the country. So the collaboration or partnership makes policy making much more complex. So the points that I'm going to cover in 40 minutes of my lecture is, I'm going to talk about the basic definition of public policy, what is policy cycle. Then I'm going to cover the concept of collaborative governance and why it has become so important in about last 20 years. Because we have heard of model of PPP, but actually collaborative governance goes step ahead than public-private partnership. And the significance of collaborative governance in the current context, and I would say in the current context of COVID also, because we're seeing that state machinery needs this active engagement from non-governmental organizations, civil society, various agencies, to actually curb a crisis-like situation or catastrophe which the world has been hit by in last 8 months. And then what are the collaborative processes that we need to engage in? Because when we are celebrating or propagating the concept of collaborative governance, we need to know the modalities, we need to know the tools and the instruments by which you achieve this collaboration. Because collaboration, by definition itself, it creates a level playing field. It is not the top-bottom approach, which was the traditional and the conventional way of policy making. Collaborative processes gives equal weight, importance, significance to all the stakeholders and gives them a voice and a platform to be part of the process of policy making, policy implementation, and policy execution. So this is a thick kind of an engagement. We're talking about very close association between the policy makers, policy implementers, and the civil society or citizens at large, who are the final recipient of the policy, whatever is made by the government or other agencies. And I would end with a very, very simple case study so that you can, understand what I have talked about by seeing the simplest case study that I could think about, and that's situated in Delhi, and I will talk about it towards the end. And while I'm talking about, you need to also, link it to the cases or ideas which you have seen around yourself in terms of collaborative governance. So while I talk, it would be very interesting and very engaging for you also not to be, bogged down by the technicalities of the concepts that we're going to use, but move on to the simple examples which you can think about, where simple partnerships, equal partnerships and participation allowed you to achieve higher ends and better ends. And even, establish this kind of consensus building within the team itself, so that when you actually go ahead and implement those policies, plans, decisions, it's more smoother, more achievable, more desirable, and more doable. So these are the key words around which we're going to focus in my talk for about 40-50 minutes. And I will keep last 10 minutes for engagement, because it will not be good that I continue to talk while I don't get any voices or concerns or any questions or doubts or any good point which you think about while I'm teaching. So let me just begin with what is a public policy. I use the word that public before the word policy makes the focus on the government. It is a method through which the political vision of the government or a political party in power is realized. It brings about deliverable outcomes. It is a method by which you achieve the goals. So if you look into the larger political scenario, the manifestos or the constitution itself is about the aspirations. When we say that we want to have equality in India, and we talk about social, economic, and political equality, this is an aspiration which we want to achieve. To achieve that thing, we need to, formulate and devise specific methods or policies or decision so that all these larger goals become executable or realizable. So you look around any field, whether it's a cultural policy, it's about having a secular country, it's about achieving great economic progress, allowing the GDP to grow. So you see each domain which is around you is impacted by the government policy, whether it's a health policy, education policy, traffic rules, international policy. So the the impact of public policy is enormous in our life, because the presence of government in our life is there in every sphere, right from our birth. What we say is cradle to grave. The impact, the implications of policies become enormous in our life. So if I have to say, what is a policy? Theoretically, it is just defined as policy is authoritative allocation of values. Why I use this word is, why it is an authoritative allocation of values? First of all, because there are a number of values, and each political party, whether it's in America, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, or within India, whether it's a BJP party or Congress party, stands for certain values, and they are different from each other. There is a subtle difference or maybe blatant difference between two political parties, it depends. but there are values which political parties aim to achieve. And the term authoritative allocation means that when you give the mandate to the government, you are in a way giving legitimacy to the government. You are authorizing the government to make laws for you for 4 years or for 5 years, depending upon the system we're talking about. So it's an authoritative allocation, because when the law is passed by the legislature, we are bound to adhere to it. We're bound to follow those rules. And it involves, as I said, social, political, cultural dynamics. But the people are the most critical element of policy making, because it is the people that we are aiming to deliver to. They are the final recipient of the policy making. So the institutions, the context, and the people form the kind of a trio for policy making. Now, the whole process, as I said, policy making would involve all these actors into it, and the policy making, whether it's rational or irrational, whether it's pandering to a particular community, whether it's narrow or larger, whether it's truly good for the society or not, will depend upon the policy choices which the government is making. And then I talked about the institutions. Institutions are very important. And if you're familiar with the whole democratic decision-making processes, we know that the legislature or the parliament is where the policies are made. But policy is not, legislature is not the stand-alone kind of a thing. They are impacted by number of standing committees, expert committees, and the laws are formulated with legal experts. So the institutions, even though theoretically when we talk about legislature is a lawmaking body, we actually involve number of institutions which become actual part of policy making process. Then we know that there are actors involved in it at different levels. For example, in India, when we talk about policy making, we are a federal government. So there are many, many subjects in the government itself where, for example, there's a state list, there's a concurrent list, and there's a central list. So policy making in each terrain also becomes that what are the actors which are actually going to get involved while we are making policy? What are the levels of the government, whether it's a central government, state government, and even the local government, the Panchayati Raj organizations is in fact the method of democratic decentralization itself. So we are talking about multiple players within a policy making system. And networks, again, networks is a new concept which has come about, and policy networks or social networks. We're not talking about the social media networks. We're talking about this kind of synergy which is created, and the whole network theory actually has been taken from the concept of social capital. The social, we always talk about the economic capital. We talk about the military strength of a nation. But the new concept is, and this has been taken by a very famous thinker who was an American thinker, Tocqueville. Alex D. Tocqueville talks about it, that how society itself can be a creation of social capital. And the significance of social capital is enormous, because when society or community involvement becomes very important, you will see rapid changes in the society. And India is not unfamiliar with it. Gandhi, JP movement, Budhan movement, all these movements which we talk about, which revolutionized the society, which brought about change in the ethos and values of the society, was brought about with this enormous synergy and networks, which was beyond the formal institutions of the government. So networks may include the formal institutions, which I've talked about, the legislature, the executive and judiciary, but often it is beyond the formal institution. It engages with the society. It talks to the people directly. It brings that kind of collaboration within the society where people themselves pick up a cause and go ahead and with the community involvement, resolve to solve the problem. Now, for a moment, if you look into this pandemic itself, you will see that during the lockdown itself, when there was a huge migration crisis, a lot of people, a lot of NGOs, a lot of social enterprises, individual philanthropists, individual volunteers came out and solved the problem of the society. So it creates a network of people who have the intent to do something for the society. And in fact, I will go ahead and say that sometimes, even though the institutional mechanism of lawmaking may be very strong, but if it does not have a strong social network, the chances of achieving the desirable outcomes through policies is highly reduced, because the community is not bought into or brought into the processes, or they're not completely engaged and committed or involved with the solving of the problem. Another example which randomly comes to my mind is the whole pulse polio program. It involved the people. It had to make families or women think about it. Think about whole sanitation program, which was brought about by Modi, the toilet program. It just did not need, you can create toilets, but it required the mindset change. And mindset change, education, involvement, breaking this old way of thinking requires this enormous one-to-one engagement. Another organization, Seva, ASHA workers, what were they doing during the pandemic? They were theoretically doing what we are teaching now. That is, they were engaging in collaborative governance. They were that extra arm of the government, which besides the police, besides the government, besides the institutions which were involved in curbing the pandemic, were engaged through volunteerism. And if you look into the pay that they were getting for per day, Asha, it was minuscule. It was so less, yet they were risking their lives, yet they were going door to door, telling people about masks, telling people about sanitation, telling people about washing their hands. So a success of any policy, and in the context of COVID is very, very significant. COVID requires, the curbing of the COVID requires collaborative mechanisms. It requires, unless until each one of us decides to follow the norms or the guidelines provided by the government itself, because there is a policy which the government has come up, both during the lockdown and then each phase of unlock. But the advisory of the government continues to be same, that please take care of yourself. And now the onus of responsibility of
Roopinder, just a second here. I'm so sorry to cut you in between, but we have another 20 minutes left of your time. So I would request you to, take up the very important parts that you would love to discuss right now. And later we will, of course, share your slides with the participants. So
sure, thank you for, because as a typical teacher, you get swayed with ideas. And yeah, I will, I was doing what I need to do. I was explaining them collaborative governance in a very, very contextualized way of what is happening now. So I thought this is a better way of,
Definitely.
So anyway, yeah. So, when I was talking to you about what happens when some of these things don't, the positive impetus or a thrust is lacking from the community. So even though there may be wonderful programs and policies set up by the government, if there is no faith in this, look at these points and the slides, and you will see this kind of circle which is emerging, which is often talked about as the public policy futility trap, because even though a wonderful, highly specialized and expert policies can be made, it fails to implement because the society and citizens have lost the confidence. So policy ideas and progresses then do not bring about the kind of outcomes that we are looking for. And citizens and practitioners also get to lose the confidence in the state capability to implement the effective public policy solutions. And then the ideas and programs often fall short. And when I talk about this is a very, very normal scenario which happens whenever the policy is made. In fact, most of the policies in most of the countries, whether it's literacy for everybody, whether it's education for everybody, whether it's increasing of employment, do get into this zone of policy traps, because the legitimacy and the confidence which the common people should have on the government is somewhere missing. And that we can, of course, I'm very short of time, but we can talk about number of issues: the bureaucratic system, the red tapeism, the corruption, the different models through which citizens engage, and why the law or the policy fails. So we have seen, and we are well acquainted with the fact that policies often fall short. And I remember the quote which Rajiv Gandhi gave, that out of every 100 rupees dispersed for the welfare of the citizen, just about 10 rupees reaches the actual client or the customer or the marginalized community which they were aiming at. So there were a number of leakages, number of problems, bureaucratic hurdles which call. So we are, in the terms of talking about collaborative governance, trying to escape the futility trap of public policy. And the futility trap is breaking this kind of a vicious circle which brings about, because this is a circle, vicious circle, because if the government doesn't perform well, the citizens continue to get alienated. Alienated is a term which I would want you to look into post the lecture, because alienation is when people get withdrawn, they are not happy with the government, and the whole democratic engagements, whether it is through voting pattern, look at the voting pattern in India, it is a reflective of the fact that about just 40% of the people go and vote, and 60% of the people are not having faith in either BJP government or the Congress government. So this is typical alienation which we talk about. And collaborative mechanism, collaborative governance can help you escape this futility trap, because then all the black points, which was the negative point here, gets into green zone. That means problems are progressively addressed, and citizens and practitioners actually gain confidence in the state capability to implement effective public policy. This is the fundamental point, the most significant point which should happen, that when citizens are heard, when citizens' voices is registered, then the confidence in or the legitimacy of the policy making processes gathers more momentum, because you personally get committed to the goals. And that means, again, I'll just keep talking about, you just look at Gandhi, what he did. The whole mass movement was based on collaborative mechanism, where a salt satyagraha or a Dandi march or a simple non-cooperation movement was not somebody planning up there sitting in an ivory tower of bureaucratic systems, but rather Gandhi was so engaged with the community, the charkha. All these things are symbolic of collaborative governance, that you can galvanize the whole community, get the community personally invested in a program when the program itself emerges from what we call is the bottom of the pyramid itself, or which engages the community, not in that manner of law, coming from law agencies and then executed through the deterrence or cohesive methods or through force of the police sector. That's a different model we're talking about. Here we are talking about different approach, where community or Panchayati Raj, if you just keep the model of Panchayati Raj in your mind, you will see that the panchayat allows a representative of and if you know how panchayats are, you have 1/3 of the seats reserved for the community. That is what does it do? It is involving women. It is involving the scheduled caste. It is involving the scheduled tribes, and thereby they become personally involved, and the outcome is, as I keep saying, it increases enormously. And this has been tested and tried thing. When I give the example of Gandhi, JP movement, Buddha movement, and so many other examples when I'm talking about COVID and current situation, it has been proved time and again. And that is why the need to move into that collaborative zone, because here we are talking about, as I said, we're talking not of the top-down approach, we are talking about a deliberative and multilateral processes. And as I kept saying, the first point of it is that the failure of the downstream implementation of policies and the high cost And the politicization of the regulation process and lawmaking has made the implementation of the policies difficult. And that is why we're talking about two-way communications, two-way engagement between the agencies and the stakeholders in the collaborative system. And as I said, it is a thrust for deliberative, decentralized, and deepening of democracy. Keep in mind 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. Both of them are in 1990s, 1991 and 1992, talked about this empowering the local governments, making them the thriving hub of democratic engagements and deliberations and debates so that the community solves their problem itself. So it allows the voices, it allows the citizen-centered government, it allows the system to become more responsive rather than being a cold up there, some system which is unreachable by the marginalized, by the poor, by the people who don't feel part of the system itself. So it is a method of reaching out to the people, not in terms of giving policies itself, but rather allowing them to become part of the policy making process itself. And the third important thrust which has happened is a new school has emerged in the public policy public policy literature, which is known as new public management. So it's no longer considered to be new public administration or public administration itself. We are using deliberately the term new public management, because it tries to amalgamate or bring together this business management acumenship along with the goals of social inclusion, social benefit, social equity, social justice, which is a thrust, which is the area which the government should be concerned with. So it sort of buckles the two things. We use the mechanism, methods, and principles of organizing the government in a way which brings about the efficiency, economy, and effectiveness of the private sector. So that is collaboration also. That means we are not talking of the public sector and the private sector as two different, compartmentalized zones out of touch with each other. We in modern management thought or in public management thought are talking about, can we create this kind of a hybrid systems where the goal is public good, public services, and yet we adopt the business methodology and business efficiency mechanism, which can allow to achieve the goal A, but also to stop a lot of leakages and pilferage which happens within the government sector. Because when we use the word government sector, the term public policy is very pejorative. We know when we talk about public policy, look at Air India, look at some of the public sector organizations, that they're infected with lack of profit generation. They're slow, they're not linked to the market. So invariably, public sector is often talked about in terms of not being able to achieve its goal and being a burden on the exchequer of the government itself. So good governance mechanism is talking about blurring this kind of a boundary between the public and the private sector. So this is a simple definition which you can read yourself. It is what I have been talking about. I'll share this slide with you. So it is basically about linkages across the boundaries, going beyond the public sector. And this is what I was talking about. So when we talk about public sector or collaborative governance, it is not just of the government sector that we need to. The first table, the first segment of the table talks about it. It is government and public. But we look at the arrows which are moving. We are actually talking about the politics and the policy. We're talking about the business sector, and we're also talking about the social and the cultural context. So if we have to bring about a change, these three boxes have to align themselves to understand the full spectrum of collaboration. And I would say collaboration is not just a public policy or political domain. It has become a concern of organizational. If you're a student of business management or business administration, you will also hear of team building. You also talk about bottom-up approach, we also talk about listening to the people. So it's not that public policy per se has shifted its in terms of paradigm, in terms of focus to the local people. Social sciences, social capital, NGOs are all moving to this domain where you can have more engaged space for the society. So it's basically multi-partnered governance. It's a hybrid arrangement. It is a kind of a joined up government between the public and the private sector, and it's based on high level and intense level of community-based collaboration. It underpins itself on civic engagement, involvement of the people at a very, very thick level. I was, so yeah. So when we talk about and celebrate, when I'm propagating the case for collaborative governance, that the time for collaborative governance is here, we see collaboration around self, there are certain realities that we need to be aware of. And these reality can be talked about as antecedent conditions. That means the preconditions where we are wanting to achieve collaboration. I want to bring in the context of India. Whenever we make a policy, you will see that there are vested interest, power brokerage, lobbying, which stops or curbs. Look at the farmers' bill which has been passed. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm saying that there are clashes and conflicts which emerges, which bring about any major shift in economic, social, cultural, political policies, even at the global terrain. Any shift in the hegemonic position of USA to another hegemon called China will create this kind of conflict of zones. So the antecedent condition, that is where we are trying to establish collaboration, becomes very, very important. So collaboration processes have to work with these preconditions, whether there's a history of conflict or cooperation in that area. And of course, the role of the leadership, institutional designs, the terms which I've been using since my beginning of the class. Yeah, sorry.
I'm so sorry to do this again, but we have another 5 minutes to go now.
So can we sort of, I hope, so do we leave the last 5 minutes for some kind of conversation?
Yeah, definitely. I think that'll be good. So guys, we had already...
This chart is explaining a lot. So if you take 1 minute to see it, this is a whole collaborative mechanism which sets in. And some of the terms I've talked about, but if there is any specific term or point which is not clear, I can help explain it further.
Yeah, for our participants, you can ask them any questions that you have.
Yeah.
I think if there is a question, we can take it up. Otherwise, I think maybe because I found the session to be highly insightful and very innovatively planned. So maybe they are understanding things the way you want them to, is why there are no questions.
It's a very, very super specialized zone, and it's a very, very new concept. So to teach it in about means I teach this paper in MA level in the final year. So it's a full semester that I teach this paper. I mean, in a sense, collaborative governance is one of the themes of the master's level paper. So it takes about a full semester to bring about whole concepts with very, very relevant examples. So in my PowerPoint presentation, have shared a very, very relevant example of Bhagidari scheme, which is run in India and Delhi particularly. So you can look into that and contextualize what I have taught you in theoretically, and how the whole Bhagidari scheme, which started in 2000 by Sheila Dixit, was a huge success. So the last few slides of my PPT and it's not written material, is in a figurative flow chart. It will help you. It's called kind of self-explanatory, and of course you have to do. And the last slide.
You have two questions.
So some readings for if you're keen on reading and understanding what it is all about. I've provided around 3 readings to you also to get the elementary understanding of the subject itself. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Tanya.
you have questions, if you would like to take them up, any of them. I think someone was asking about an example where you can talk about how the government has escaped the futility trap. That was one question.
Yeah, there are many examples, because each policy there is a whole matrix when we talk about policy making, assessment and evaluation. And that's the last stage in the policy cycle itself. And when there are many policies, in fact, all the policies which achieve the targets have been escaping the futility trap. But globally, there are a number of examples, but within India itself, there are examples. For example, pulse polio is an example where we take another country, Pakistan, just next to it. The rigidity of the community there, because of certain, wrong information which gets circulated, well, they have not been able to control that disease so far.
Roopinder.
So it's an example of, sorry.
I'm so sorry to be doing this, but your time is short. So I think we'll have to end this now. So thank you so much for this session. I'm going to share your slides with people. And if they have any questions, I'm sure they can reach out to you separately as well. Thank you so much for taking time out for this session today.
Thank you,
and
Tanya.
for the participants, thank you so much. Participants, we'll start the next session